Hello everyone. I am going to be today demonstrating a specific math lesson that I taught, and I'll be explaining how I differentiated that lesson according and how I differentiated the content, the process, and the product according to my students' readiness, interests, and their learning profiles. So I had four frameworks that sort of grounded my reasoning in designing the lesson. So these are the four pieces, the four, I guess, theoretical frameworks. The first that I thought a lot about was Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So I worked to design different centers that accessed as many of these various intelligences as possible and use those intelligences to help students arrive at the lesson objective. I also utilized the Universal Design for Learning in designing the mini lesson itself, just to make sure that there were no barriers to the learning. Of course, I used this sort of flow chart for differentiating instruction, and that helped ground me in exactly um, how I should be differentiating. Um, this is this is more of the what. The Gardner was more of the how, um, and the UDL was sort of like an overarching framework for it all. Finally, I used my students' IEPs, and students without IEPs, I used what I knew about them as learners, so that the lesson or the centers that I was designing made sense for them. Um, because ultimately that's the goal. So this is the lesson that I designed. As you can see, there are differentiated content and content objectives. So there's something that we're all doing, and that's the Common Core standard is what we're all doing. But I know that most students are capable of much more than that. So I do have some more reaching goals. This right here is just showing how I thought out the different centers. Um, and this is just sort of naming the various intelligences that each center hits. As you can see, I am still working on incorporating more intelligences into my centers. So at this point, there is no music intelligence. There's no naturalistic intelligence. Um, so those are pieces that I'm working on. So now that you have sort of the theoretical framework, I'm actually going to jump in and show you what the lesson looked like in our classroom of Northeastern. So for the mini lesson, the bulk of the mini lesson was just sort of reviewing what we knew about quadrilaterals already. Um, and what I actually did is I set them this challenge question, which I drew this on the board and I said, is this a quadrilateral? And this was a really great moment in the class because half the class said yes, half the class said no. So I set this as our guiding question for the day. And as students work throughout the day, throughout the lesson, I checked in with them and I was like, let's go back to that challenge question. How many points do you see? How many angles? Also, the directions I made very clear and very explicit. These is the same images and the same language I use every time that they're doing centers. So there's three expectations. I like to keep it pretty simple. And the students, they all know this by heart now. They actually say them with me when I say them. So it's just level one, sit and raise the hand and focus on the math. So now I'm actually going to get into each center for the day. And students actually had free choice over which centers they visited. I really wanted to be flexible and allow the students to sort of assess themselves and what it was that they needed to learn. So students could go to whatever center they wanted to. They could stay for however long they wanted. It wasn't about the students had to go to each and every single center that day. Um, it was about the students were going to the centers that they were finding most useful. Um, so the first center they could go to, or the first option, I guess, was the sorted quadrilateral power polygons. This was a station where students were given a mat that had that had quadrilaterals on one side, not quadrilaterals on the other side, and they had to put all the quadrilaterals on the right side. So after that, they actually spent some time tracing the different shapes onto the correct sides. Um, this enabled students to really start noticing, what features made a quadrilateral, and it was interesting to see, how some students will gravitate towards um, identifying quadrilaterals as always having four sides, while others might identify it as having 4 points or 4 vertices. The next center was the quadrilaterals on the geoboard, so using rubber bands to actually make those quadrilaterals. And this was a great center for students who were working on that idea of the vertices, because you actually, to make the shape, you put the rubber band around 4 specific points. So this is something I actually directed some students to. I was like, hey, why don't you try this out? And I didn't really actually give a reason why, which, reflecting on it now, may have been helpful for the student, but I thought that this was an area where that like a certain student would have more knowledge about the vertices of a quadrilateral. The next station was a series of laptops set up to this website called mathisfun.com, and there was an interactive program where students could actually drag the 4 vertices of a quadrilateral to make various different types of quadrilaterals. Students started exploring the website itself, and they were finding different resources about quadrilaterals and sharing them with each other. You have never heard a 6-year-old so excited about polygons. It was a really great moment where kids were teaching each other. I heard kids, reading out the texts for the other kids at the table. So it was a really great moment, and I think it was because the children had some freedom around what to do on the website, and they also had freedom to choose to go to that center. The last center that I had was a center for practicing actually drawing the quadrilaterals. And I framed it as such. I was like, some of us are really working on actually how to draw these shapes. And I actually had more than quadrilaterals. I had all the shapes, all the 2-dimensional shapes we had been working on. So I framed it as, some of us have really been working on how to actually draw these shapes. And if that is something that you think you need some more practice in, this would be a good center for you. And I was very happy to see that a lot of students immediately went to that center because they were able to self-identify that was an area that they were struggling in. And they wanted to improve upon. So, by actually developing those fine motor skills, they're also developing the math concepts that we were trying to get at. And that is my differentiated instruction. Thank you.